And we are live with Dr. David Kamnitzer. He goes by Dr. David. He is a healer, a spiritual guide, an ontological coach, a holistic doctor, a chiropractor for many, many years. His passion is to assist others in freeing the body and freeing the soul. He's been in the healing arts for over 45 years and been a doctor for the past 35 years. He has a private practice in San Jose, California, and consults with people all over the world. Thank you for joining us, Dr. David. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
How are you doing today? And what can you tell us about your work?
I feel good today. I like when it's sunny, but not too hot, the air a little dry, a light breeze, so it's good.
Perfect.
So my work is really all about freeing the body and freeing the soul to empower people to have a higher quality of life and to be more effective in life. And the selfish aspect of that motivation is that the world that I want to live in is populated by a critical mass of people that are that way. In other words, um, I like being with people and being around people who have a high quality of life and have uh, a certain kind of alacrity and effectiveness and integrity and ambition and ability and compassion in their life. And so that's a selfish motivation for all that I do, is to help bring forth the world that I would like to live in and that I believe my children and their grandchildren probably would like to live in. But I would say the emphasis on my work, because you can't be all things to all people, and you kind of have to find your sweet spot. There's an expression I like called to learn to be easy in your harness. And I have a strong sense that I'm here for helping to teach the teachers and heal the healers. I'm probably not your Reader's Digest kind of guy. I think my leverage, my maximum impact, and my maximum joy is to empower people that I know have a passion to propagate that and to make whatever teaching I'm transmitting, to make it their own, and then to extend that and propagate that out so that um, so that more and more people are enlightened, are awakened to the truth of their being, and are guided once they've had a certain opening. They're guided along that journey in a way that can save them some time and maybe some suffering, and to be there as a friend along the way. And so for me, it's really about freeing the body and freeing the soul, because as long as souls, as long as we're incarnated as a human being on the surface of planet Earth in a physical body, my observation is that it's very valuable to have not only a high level of soul attunement, but also to be embodied, for that attunement to be embodied, uh, and to be integrated with the energies and the elements of our bodies and of planet Earth. Um, th- there's something about there's something about spirituality as it expresses through a human being, where my experience is and my observation is that the people that are the most joyous, the most peaceful, the most effective, um, have a certain sense of unity and integration with soul and body that other people don't. And it's very easy, if you're thrown into Western culture with Western paradigms, it's very easy without even consciously knowing it to have bought into this paradigm or worldview that somehow God and spiritual matters are over there
Mm.
and we are over here in this physical world. And then maybe when we leave the physical body or die, then maybe we can know heaven.
Mm.
And to me, that's a tragic misperception. It's a violation of one of the principal core spiritual understandings, which would be the principle of unity. And our culture, we're just thrown to be in a culture that is based on dualistic notions. Even the English language structurally is based on many dualistic notions. And to sort of begin to recognize the way we were thrown to be and realize that the way we're thrown to be may not be the way we really are. And I think that humility and that passion to know truth is really the key to the spiritual fire that burns brightly enough to keep you on the path of of self-realization and knowing truth for a long period of time, because it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Mm.
And so what really motivated me when I was younger was that I had a burning desire to have satisfactory answers, first for myself and then for others, for two questions that weren't necessarily well formulated as a child, but was definitely there. And one question was, well, if there really is a God and a loving God, a loving parent, so to speak, why why would he allow the children to have so much suffering? That was a question that the people around me either weren't asking, or the answers that I was being exposed to were not satisfying to me. And sort of a corollary question to that, that kind of motivated my search, was how come some people are so healthy, so happy, so successful? And how come some people are so unhappy, unhealthy, and unsuccessful? And my commitment to being and doing and having whatever I needed to be and do and have to eventually get answers to those two questions that were satisfying to me is what drove my search, that took me all sorts of places. And somewhere along the line, I um, had a critical mass of knowing answers to those two questions that uh, quenched my thirst. And then it was a matter of putting that state of being or consciousness uh, in service to love and to life. And and that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's awesome. That sounds like quite the journey, and I'd love to, I guess, figure out which modalities first and how exactly you help people go get to a more spiritual place while being embodied. Because I feel we see one or the other, like you mentioned, and then we can get to the answers of your two questions and figure out what it is you concluded or came to over the years. But I guess
Well,
first, just
I
wanted
mean,
to clarify how you'd help, whichever way. Sorry, go ahead.
well, I mean, I could tell you more about my personal story, and or I could tell you more about the different ways that I've observed how many people uh, enter into that path.
Um, if if it's fine, if we could start with how you help people get there. I know it started off like you had more of a uh, like the chiropractic background, and then it took you more towards a spiritual place, and the two sort of
Yeah.
merged. And
Yeah, actually, it was more the other way.
okay,
It's actually more the other way. But again, I don't know if you're wanting me to talk about my journey or if you want me to talk about what I've observed about people in general.
we hopefully we can do both. Maybe we could get to what you've observed, and then we could go back to the
Okay,
journey.
if there's time. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure.
So in terms of, I've worked with thousands of people over decades, and the answer to your question is that it's very variable. In other words, um, what tends to bring people one way or another to the spiritual path is that their way of being and thinking and acting and looking at the world has gotten them to a certain point that isn't completely satisfying to them, or they have some kind of pain or some kind of care or some kind of concern or some kind of passion they want to pursue more vigorously, that uh, at some level they sense that uh, possibly I could help that. And so, if, as you might imagine, that starting place can be extremely varied. I mean, it could be all the way from somebody having a existential crisis to somebody coming in uh, with chronic back pain. In other words, one of the things that's important to understand is that human beings are multidimensional, and every dimension has the potential to ripple its impact through all the other dimensions. And so, if you've had a car accident and you've been physically stressed, that can have an impact emotionally, sexually, physically, socially, financially, spiritually. It can get you interested intellectually in certain topics. If someone's, uh, so that would be like a physical catalyst that gets you into a conversation of sorts, right? But it doesn't have to be physical, right? Somebody could be experiencing tremendous uh, fear or anger or sadness or confusion or boredom, um, or they could have had some shocking loss in their life. Their spouse could have suddenly died, or um, you know, or it could be more along the lines of what it's more rare, but it could be something along the lines of my own journey, where it's not that I was in some kind of terrible crisis, but somehow my soul came into this lifetime with these burning questions. So it could be somebody who just, for some reason that we don't completely understand usually, just has a passion to know and understand something, or to uh, create something or accomplish something that they don't quite have well defined, or they don't quite know where to go. So it's important to understand that the answer to your question is not straightforward. You can come into an awakening process from many, many, many different angles. But I would say the common denominator is that there's either some care or concern or pain that someone doesn't feel confident they can handle on their own, which is usually the case, or more rarely, what I mentioned earlier, is somebody could just have a burning passion to be or do something or have something, and for some reason they believe that I can help them with that.
Perfect.
Um, so in
Uh,
in like I said, in my case,
yeah.
um, It was more that I had this moving in me even before I was old enough to cognitively be able to speak about it the way that I'm speaking about it with you. In fact, very often our conscious mind is the last to know.
Hmm.
Life has a level of depth and power and rhythm that is there whether your conscious mind is active or not, how intellectual you are or not, your vocabulary or not. And so, but it can also be very helpful at a certain point for some people to be able to have the linguistic distinctions, to be able to speak about it, or to be able to name a particular feeling they're having. But life is happening on so many levels that are much deeper than whether your conscious or thinking mind is engaged or not. And one of the challenges is that, if getting back to the conversation about the way we're thrown to be in Western culture, there's this idea in Western culture that's based on a Cartesian view, or what Descartes said. He said, I think, therefore I am. Now, for me, that is a real trap, because if you have adopted the belief that in order for you to be, you have to think, you're not going to want to let go of thinking. Because if you're being that you have to think to be, then if you let go of thinking, you're dead.
Hmm.
And so if I was a mean person and I wanted to make sure that you never awaken, that you never know truth, I would just have you buy the notion that in order to be, you have to think. Because then your awareness of yourself wouldn't go beyond thinking. And then your thinking would have you instead of you having thinking. And in order to be able to know yourself, you have to know yourself with or without thinking. And even to introduce to someone the possibility of considering that they've been being that they are their thinking, but maybe they're not their thinking, is a very powerful possibility to offer someone who's been thrown into a culture that has turned the thinking mind into a false idol. And one spiritual principle you can take to the bank is that anything that you've turned into a false idol will end up dominating your life experience.
I love that. We're not our thoughts. We're the thinker having the thoughts. And
Well, I would say that's closer to the truth.
okay.
Because even your notion of who you think the thinker
Right.
is a thought.
Yeah. It's
In other words, you have a notion of the thinker
mm,
that's also a thought about the thinker.
totally. Yeah. I see
And
that.
so a deeper level of inquiry, once you're comfortable inquiring into your body sensations and your beliefs and your thoughts and your attitudes and your moods and your memories and your fantasies and your viewpoints, there's a deeper level of inquiry, which is to inquire into the inquirer.
Mm,
Because it's possible and likely that what you're being is the inquirer is also a bunch of thoughts.
yeah.
And that is a much more advanced level of inquiry. And that is the level of ontological inquiry, because ontology is the study and the science of being. And we have a blind spot in our culture about being and about studying being. And some of it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is the Cartesian confusion that to be, you must think.
Yeah. It's It's deep stuff. How do you work? I guess getting back to how you work with clients. I guess depending on their level, you'd have different strategies and
Not
different.
only their
But yeah,
level, but also why they think they're coming to me.
okay,
You have to build a bridge to where people are.
right.
Like I could be the most like cosmically enlightened being in the known universe, right? But if I can't build a bridge to meet you where you are so that we can relate
Mm,
and we can build some sense of trust and affinity and compassion. I mean, part of the value of suffering is that once you're not suffering, then when you're working with people that are suffering, you have a compassion that you wouldn't have otherwise had if you hadn't experienced some type of similar suffering. And the fact that you are being in this way of being now, even though you suffered in the past, is a living testament to the person you're wanting to help, that it's possible, that even though, like, I know your pain and I know where you are and I know what that feels like and I know what that can look like. And I have great compassion for that. And I might tell a story about a time in my life when maybe I had a similar view or a similar challenge or similar experience, and then build on that and share a little bit about my journey. And, it goes back to a wonderful saying in Buddhism that um, I don't know how it came up. I don't know if somebody asked the Buddha a question or how it came up, but one of the things they talk about in Buddhism is, there's times on the path that are just tough, really hard times. And somehow the question came up about, where, what can we do? Where can we take refuge when we're really, really having a really hard time? And in Buddhism, they talk about you can take refuge in three places. They're not mutually exclusive. Um, you can take refuge in the Buddha, which is the living embodiment of truth, of the teaching. You can take refuge in the Dharma, which is the perennial philosophy, the teachings that have been passed down for ages. And you can also take refuge in the Sangha, which is the fellow community of spiritual travelers. And so I do my best to, uh, be what I'm talking about. I do my best to uh, be able to linguistically bring forth a codification of the teaching that they can understand. And if they don't have a Sangha, if they don't have at least one other person in their life that is anchored to a critical mass in truth and is committed to that, then I'm that for them. And I do what I can to open up opportunities for them to meet and interact with other people that are going through similar things, because very often uh, they'll be able to relate in some ways better to a fellow student of mine
Mm.
necessarily than maybe to me. Um, so I so I attempt to leverage all three of those in my work with people.
That's awesome. So you use your own presence, you use ontology, you use your past experiences to help bridge that gap and meet people. And yeah, community is a big part of I feel healing for me. And of course, you mentioned. So if you could talk about the first one, Buddha, and then the second one is Dharma, the practices. So the first one is connecting to that sense within you, or is it more connecting to sort of the idea of the ideal Buddha, or
No. I don't over intellectualize it at all. It's
okay,
just that my presence, to
right,
the extent that I am actually embodying the teaching,
gotcha.
in the sense that I am the teaching, in the sense that the teaching, the living Dharma is working in me and through me and as me, to the extent that I am a better, to use St. Francis's words, to the extent that I am a better and better instrument
Mm.
of God's love and light and truth and peace, then they're actually in the presence of that. And and if you look historically at how spiritual teaching is transmitted effectively, it's usually when the student has been in the presence of the teacher long enough that eventually their mind starts to quiet down. They start to consider things they hadn't considered. They, their relationship to their ego has evolved to the point where there is an opening that wasn't there before. And since truth is, if the opening is there, then it is there. It's not like the way the ego constructs something. And then if the ego stopped constructing that thought edifice, it would be gone. Truth isn't like that.
Right.
Truth is. And therefore, we don't have to make it happen. We don't have to create it. We just have to kind of stop making shit up.
Yeah.
But you can't stop making something up until it really, really hits you, not just like as an intellectual idea. I mean, that's how it starts, but nothing really happens until you have a deep change of heart. And that's correlated with a sort of, oh my God, on your knees realization that stuff that you thought was true, you just made up.
Mm.
Like maybe some of the stuff you literally just made up out of nothing. And a lot of the stuff you made up, other people made up and you agreed with it. Your culture made stuff up and you agreed with it without consciously knowing you agreed with it. Your parents made stuff up. Your teachers made stuff up. Your doctors made stuff up, right? And so these authority figures and role models, their thoughts only have power over you if you agree to them, but you don't have to be consciously aware initially that you agreed to them for them to have the power over you. And so a big part of the spiritual path is the realization of everything that you bought or made up that you've been living as true that may not be true. And it takes a lot of courage to entertain that notion because it rocks your world. And for someone to be willing to put their world at risk, the way the mind works, the odds that they will do that, if there's no example of another possibility, is extremely low. And that's why being in the presence of a true teacher is so valuable, because it's in your face as a student. It's like there actually is another human being that is living this other way, even though it seems really weird to me. And I don't know how to get there. And I don't quite know what makes this guy tick. but whatever he's smoking, I want some of it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And it's one of the sayings I have is that your last spiritual teacher will be your ultimate disappointment. Because
Yeah.
because a really good radical spiritual teacher will help you dispel yourself of your illusions, and so everything that you thought would be the ticket isn't.
No, that's the make yourself redundant teacher and
you
drop
know
off that last bridge, it sounds like. But no, that's I can
and
sense
then
the
and then we
presence you're coming with. Sorry, go ahead.
and then one thing we haven't talked about is the fact
Yeah.
that in a teaching, for it to be powerful, has to be relevant to current reality for people. And so one of the things that's really current for people right now is that because of a variety of factors, people are in a chronic stress mode most of the time, and people's bodies are under all sorts of assault. And so one of the things that is important to bring spiritual teachings effectively into today's world is an appreciation of what I just said. That, like, if you go back and study the spiritual texts, that go back far, they weren't dealing with the IRS, they weren't dealing with chemtrails, they weren't dealing with GMOs, they weren't dealing with mRNA jabs, they weren't dealing with the Federal Reserve. In other words, for a spiritual teaching to be valid, in my opinion, it has to be something that empowers people in their life today. Otherwise, it's just another version of, well, it's over there.
Mm.
And so this gets back to the unity principle and the realization that we have things we can leverage today that maybe we couldn't leverage before, that can be beneficial or that can be traps. Like, for example, over the last 150 years, there's been a lot of breakthroughs in the field of depth psychology, right? And there's been a lot of breakthroughs in biochemistry and neurology and epigenetics and nutrition and being able to codify some of the ancient wisdom about herbs. And so I think an effective spiritual teacher or guide or healer needs to have an appreciation and some working facility with all of this. Not that they have to be an expert on all of it, but their worldview needs to include it. And you need to be able to know what your lane is. And then you need to find other people that are experts in some of these other lanes, and to be able to refer people. And but keep it in a context of unity so that it doesn't seem schizophrenic for people, to help people understand that it's all one thing. It's all fractals of one thing. There's only unity. There, ego-based consciousness is based on the misperception of separation. You see, the ego conflates uniqueness, which does exist, with separation. And so the ego, I'll give you, this will be helpful for you and your viewers and listeners to see the difference between the way truth is and the way the ego sees things. So imagine that you see a rainbow and you see these 7 colors. Well, the ego's going to go, well, this spiritual unity stuff is all bullshit, obviously, because it's very clear to me that I see 7 separate colors. So don't give me this crap that there's no separation. And it's real on its high horse about that. Now, there's a problem with that. And the problem with that is that the ego doesn't know and cannot know and will never know that all of those unique fractals of light that we perceive as unique colors are actually a refraction under certain conditions of white light. And so the ego is arguing constantly for the existence of separation as a justification for everything that it's thinking. And so that's the trap of the ego. And then the trap of, on the other extreme, would be, well, there's only oneness, so colors are not important. That would be sort of a sophomoric understanding of unity. Well, hey, man, it's all one. Yeah, oh, I just got beat up, but it's okay, man, because it's all one. Oh, I just stole from this person, but hey, man, it's cool because it's all one. So,
yeah.
So that's a sophomoric understanding of unity that the ego is just using for its own purposes. Now, contrast that with a view of truth, which acknowledges the unity, but also acknowledges the beauty of the unique fractals of the one, without the implication or necessity to postulate separateness. And a mature spirituality is an understanding and expression of what I just said. If you can be a unique human being with a unique soul, with a unique love, with a unique purpose, and you can be embodied on the surface of planet Earth in a male or female body in this time-space coordinate, and it's not just an idea for you, but it's a living awareness of the simultaneity of the truth of unity and respect for your own uniqueness and other people's uniqueness, and a respect for your own multidimensionality and the unity of all of that, and respect for other people's multidimensionality. Now, in my book, now you are living truth in a way that's much fuller than the way most people will live truth if they just live the way they're thrown to be, being born into Western civilization. And there have been spiritual teachers throughout the ages that have attempted to build a bridge of understanding about what I'm talking about. And in my opinion, their track record has basically been pretty dismal. I mean, if you look at the number of spiritual teachers that have been out there, and you look at how many of their students actually got to that level, it's not good. And I think I have something to say about what's missing there. And my teaching is an attempt to address what's missing. And so, you know, if when I leave this world, one of the things that I want to leave this world with, and why I do these conversations and stuff, is that I want to leave the world with not only my presence, but I also want to leave the world with some type of codification of what I've realized, so that it has nothing to do with whether I'm still in a physical body or not.
And how would that look? Would that be a book or through your students or some?
I think it looks all sorts of ways. I think it looks like this conversation. I think it looks like you sharing this conversation and inviting people to do it. I think it looks like people hearing this or seeing this and having a percentage of them go, hey, I don't know what this guy's smoking, but I want some. Who knows? It takes many forms. That's what I was saying earlier in the conversation. All roads lead to Rome. It takes many forms. There's not one right answer for a question like that. And one of the limitations that many people have because of the way their formal education was or the way they were raised is there are a lot of questions that don't just have one right answer. There are some questions that do have one right answer, like, I'm here and I want to get to the nearest Pete's Coffee, and I want to know the quickest way to get there. And I can go on Google and I can find the quickest way to get there. So those kinds of questions, there's one right answer. But if you're being that all questions have one right answer, you're limiting yourself because there's a whole other category of questions that you don't ask the question to get the right answer. But there's a whole way of using questions that is very important when it comes to the spiritual path or spiritual inquiry, where you're asking the question not to get the right answer, but you're asking the question because the question becomes a new space of possibility inside of which things could show up that would likely not show up if you hadn't asked the question. And so a lot of what I do with people is teach people about these different ways of using questions.
Is that in terms of your biggest influences, in terms of what you've used, and the question part, really just me doing this podcast, talking to people, feel like I ask one question, but it goes in magical ways, and those ways are way better than the initial thought or idea or feeling behind the question. So I can see that happening here, and the other part about the questions with John Muller, who I work with, who was in a monastery for a while. It was he spoke a lot about asking the right questions as a way to uncovering the truth or getting.
Well, see, it's not so much asking the right questions; it's asking powerful questions and learning how to be with certain kinds of questions in a powerful way. Like, for example, you could ask a potentially very, very powerful question, but if you're being with the powerful question in a way where you're looking for the one right answer, it's a waste of time because there's a lot of questions that don't have one right answer. Like, I could ask you a question like, in relation to money, what have you been being? And there are many, many answers to that. I could ask you a question like, in relation to money, what could you be being? There's no right answer to that question.
Yeah.
However, that's a very powerful question if you're not looking for the right answer. In other words, if you ask yourself the question, in relation to money, what could I be being? And you just bask in that question for the next few days and just notice what comes up. That's another way of being with the question rather than demanding a right answer. So there's not only powerful questions, but there's also a powerful way to be with powerful questions that allows the power of the question to really take hold. So one way people limit themselves is asking questions that could only be powerfully related to if you're not looking for the one right answer, but they're looking for the one right answer.
Part of me is second guessing everything I'm asking or being with the question in a way, and
in other words, it's important to realize that there's a whole category of questions that you ask to get an accurate answer. Like, what's the quickest way for me to get to Pete's Coffee from my house?
right,
Given the current traffic patterns, I can call up Google and Google can tell me with a high level of accuracy and workability the answer to that question such that a right answer to that kind of question is powerful for me. And I can relate to that question like I'm looking for the accurate answer. If I want to know what 7 plus 7 is in base 10 math, there's one right answer. It's 14. Okay. So when I ask those kinds of questions, being in the mindset that I'm looking for the right answer is powerful, is workable for me. But if I'm being with the question in relation to money, what could I be being? And I'm looking for the one right answer, chances are I will get almost no value out of that question. But if I'm asking that question as a committed stance to be in the question, to be committedly living inside the question, looking out at whatever I'm looking out at from inside the question without an expectation of what I'm going to see, sense, or feel or not, but just open to what shows up as I'm committedly being with that question. Now I'm being with that powerful question in a powerful way. And most people haven't been trained to be with questions in that way. And so that's
question that you
that's an important, that's a very important, like people who are able to be with powerful questions in powerful ways tend to have a whole different life than people who don't. Their quality of life tends to be much higher. Their possibilities in a practical sense are much more. Their effectiveness in life, their willingness and ability to question their own premises is much more highly developed. Their ability to see their own biases, to own their own agendas, much, much higher, much higher.
Do you help people uncover these questions within themselves? And could you give me an example of some questions you've thought of or you've sat with deeply, or some of your clients have sat with deeply?
I think I just did that.
Okay.
You might have missed it. I don't know where you were. I think I've just done that. I think I've just given you, I mean, I don't know where you were, but I think that was a really powerful example.
That was.
Yeah. I mean, someone could transform their relationship with money if they honestly lived inside the two questions I posed to you. Number one was, in relation to money, what have you been being?
Right.
Well, I've been being there's not enough. I've been being it's hard to get. I've been being that I don't have enough formal degrees to have a lot of money. I've been being that people have to screw people over to have a lot of money. I've been being all sorts of things about money.
Gotcha.
Okay.
No, that's fair.
Yeah. In relation to money, what could I be being? Well, I could be being that maybe a lot of the things I've been thinking about money are limiting me. Maybe I could be being that I have a lot of blind spots about money. I could be being that it might be possible to have a lot of money in a way that actually represents true contribution to others. My mother gave me a view of money as blank. My father gave me a view of money as blank. My teachers gave me a view of money as blank. My religion gave me a view of money as blank. Right? So there's all sorts of questions you could be with that could be very powerful as long as you're being with those questions in a way that there's not one right answer. But if you're being with questions such that there's only one right answer, you're going to miss it.
It's valuable advice.
You're going to miss it. How, you could ask yourself, in relation to questions, what have I been being? in relation to questions, what could I be being? You know, in other words, inquiry is a very powerful skill. And it's an orientation to knowing truth as well. And whatever idea you have about truth isn't truth. In Zen, they talk about the finger pointing at the moon. Fingers can be really valuable unless you mistake them for the moon. And if you're being with fingers in such a way that you're conflating them with the moon, you'll never know the moon. So the moon, in that analogy, is truth. The finger is everything that I'm saying to you, right? All the ideas that I'm offering you. But none of those ideas are truth, because truth isn't an idea. But you can use ideas in powerful ways, but not if you buy into that I think, therefore I am. Which goes back to a powerful question I asked earlier. Do you have your thinking, or does thinking have you? So one of the biggest barriers to enlightenment is the conflation of thinking and being.
It's a lot of deep work I feel is being done here, and just with what you've shared, and what I have slowly
And then if you take all of this and you combine it with supporting the physical body,
yeah,
you have something quite powerful.
no, I thought we'd have more time, but I think I wanted you to keep talking, and I just have another guest, but that really did deeply move me, and I struggled with some aspects of it, but I could feel
Keep
things
struggling.
shifting in me.
Keep being with it. And then what
Yeah,
will
yeah.
happen is, if you're really engaged in it and you're really passionate about it, what'll happen is some of the things will resolve for you. And then over time, there'll be certain ones that you still have sincere questions about. And then if you were my student, you would come back to me and you would go, okay, I've really milked this for everything I could, and I sincerely have a few questions. Can we set up a time? And so that's the way I work on that level.
Mm.
In other words, my intention, so let's close it up this way. My intention, and we can do another session if you want about the topic we were going to talk about. So
I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
so let's talk about banana splits for a minute. If you'd never experienced a banana split, I could talk to you for hours from many different angles, all about banana splits. And you'd have a lot of ideas about banana splits. None of that would be a banana split. That's okay, as long as you know the difference, as long as you know that you don't know banana splits. But if you are being that now you know banana splits, you've limited yourself.
Mm.
Now, so there's this one realm where I could talk to you for days about the ingredients, the chemistry, the colors, the weight, the history of banana splits, and you'd have all those ideas. That's category number one. Category number two, I could give you a banana split and you could have one bite, and then you would have a taste of a banana split. You wouldn't necessarily be fully at one with banana splitness, but you would have a taste that's different, not quantitatively, but qualitatively different than category number one. And then there's category three, where you could have the whole banana split and you could be totally, at one with banana splitness. And that's like category number three. Now, there's not, none of those categories is better than any other category. But what's tragic, and I really want you to listen to this, what's tragic is many people live in category one as if they really know banana splits. But they don't. They just have a lot of ideas about banana splits, but they don't hold them as ideas about banana splits. They're being that they know banana splits, and that limits their ability to know banana splits. You see?
Yeah.
And if you just take that analogy, and instead of putting the word banana split in there, if you want to put the word myself, you'd have a good sense of what the work is all about. People have all these ideas about themselves, about others, about life, about their past, about their future, about God, about what's possible for them, but they don't relate to them as ideas about that. They relate to them like that's really true. And the minute you're being that it's true, you've limited yourself. You're living a lie. You've conflated your ideas about something with the suchness of the something, the isness of the thing. So you never go deep enough to know the isness of something, because you're being that you already know it. There's an arrogance there. There's a ignorance there, but it's even more than an ignorance. It's a blindness. It's an arrogant blindness. There's nothing wrong with ignorance, but arrogant blindness is dangerous, especially with the technology we have today. That arrogant blindness is dangerous.
Wow.
Okay.
This has been humbling, and it's been enlightening, and it's been a true pleasure and honor to talk to you, David. I really
So
appreciate.
what I've intended to do today was not just tell you about my work, but to give you a taste of it.
Yeah, I feel that now, and
Right.
I see
And,
that
and
now.
so and so because I live the distinction between telling you about it and giving you a taste of it, and because of who I am, I was able to give you a taste of it.
Yeah,
Whether you took a bite or not was up to you.
yeah,
You see, I don't control whether you'll take the bite,
yeah.
but this is the Buddha. This is being it. This isn't talking about it, just talking about it. This is simultaneously talking about it and being it. And then you can take whatever tastes you want. And if you're willing to be with that taste, I guarantee you it will take you deeper, and it will lead you to more questions. And you'll be able to be with those questions in new ways that won't just take you round and round in a mind fuck. They'll actually wind you down deeper into who you really are, into the love that you really are.
I I
Okay.
do deeply appreciate all of this. It's a session. It's more than just an interview, and it's part of me wants to unpack, and I will sit with the sense of what happened here, and it
And you
was
can all
deeply moving for me.
that's great. And you can also go back to the recording, because a lot of the things that I said earlier in the beginning that kind of scrambled your brain, you can go back to it now and you'll have a different take on it. And the third or fourth time you go back to it, you'll have an even different take on it. And so I encourage you to do that. And then if you personally, or other people that are at a level where they think they could make good use of me, feel free to connect them to how they can connect with me.
Absolutely. And I'd love to even get the masterclass in later. Sorry, there's been someone else in the waiting room for the
Sure.
last 7 minutes, but
Sure,
it was,
we can set that up in the future.
I love that. I have your information. It's truly been an honor, David, humbling, enlightening, and something I will sit with. But
Okay.
thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Thanks for the
Thank you.
opportunity to serve.
Thank
Bye.
you.